So this meeting's being recorded. Is there anybody present who is also recording? Okay, so if so that's fine. Nobody's recording. Nobody's here. So the first order of business is approval of minutes from December 16th, 2021. Any discussion from folks on that? George?
Thanks. Hey, everybody, and welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Just that I arrived during the action item C. So I assume the both A&Rs would be 400, not 500, as far as the votes.
Okay.
And I assume Amy was moved up to a voting member. It just didn't get recorded.
That's probably what happened. Yeah, I did move her up.
Yep.
So we have 400 on approved minutes, and
Yep.
then I think we moved up Amy. So it was unanimous for A and B.
But there were 5 of us total once
5.
I got there.
Right. So it should be 4 then.
For both A&Rs, yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Anything else from folks? Motion to approve the minutes from anyone?
Motion to approve with the 2 changes.
Second.
George seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Next action item is a public hearing for approval not required plan endorsement for assessor's tax map R40 lot 21 submitted by the Gwendolyn H. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I'm reading. That's funny. I was reading from the minutes from last.
I think approval is required for this.
Yeah, right. So yes. So we have a public hearing at 6 o'clock for the application of Douglas P. Airy for property located at 128 Conway Street, Assessor's Map Tax 70, Lot 17, which is located in the urban residential zoning district for a special permit pursuant to sections 204.4C20, 206.1C, 207.18, 208.3, and 208.4 of the zoning ordinance in order to allow the conversion of an existing carriage house into a detached accessory dwelling unit at this location. So I'm going to open the public hearing at 6:03 p.m. Is the applicant here, present at the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, the applicant is not here, and I have his telephone number on his application, and I'm going to give him a call right now.
Okay.
Charles, we also had a question in the chat.
Right. Eric, there's no problem with Susan maybe commenting after the public hearing. We'll allow a comment, Susan.
He's on the phone, Charles. I think it has been, because not everyone necessarily can see it, it's been discouraged during public meetings to utilize the chat function. Just wanted to point that out.
Oh, really?
Believe so. We can check with Eric.
Mr. Chairman, I called. He did not pick up. I left a message.
Well,
last week he's very organized and prompt. There's a reason he's not here. He might not have realized it. I don't know. He should be here, and he normally would be. So I expect that he's probably not going to show unless he's having computer issues.
Okay, well,
Hmm.
could we, well, so the public hearing is open. I mean, can we continue it? Can we close it and continue it? And then move on with other business and see if the applicant is able to join us?
Yeah, you could take a vote to continue it for, you know, at a time specific tonight, then they could do other business.
Okay, so is the so do we need to make a motion on that?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing until later this evening and see if the applicant shows up.
Was there a specific time?
Uh,
Because this was our only item.
Well, we have some discussion
Right.
on sort of initiatives and the information we got from FERCog. Natty?
Just a comment here, I guess. I feel like with this group, we could definitely get into some really healthy discussion specific to what the FERCog has provided, as well as a dive into the plans that were created. My suggestion would be look at 7 o'clock as the time when we revisit this opportunity if the applicant has shown up. And if not, then that would have allowed us at least an hour to review you know, the other item in these priorities and initiatives.
Okay. Does that seem reasonable to folks? Give them until 7? Okay.
Yep.
So we'll continue the public hearing at 7 o'clock.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thanks. I guess before we get into this, Susan, did you have a quick comment you wanted to make?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm working with a group called Housing Greenfield, and we have developed out of the housing forum that Greenfield and FCCPR pulled together last spring, and where 600 people attended in the 9 workshops that we ran. And there's a lot of concern about the need for affordable housing in Greenfield. We're already starting to see that housing prices are going up. They've gone up in the last probably 6 to 8 months, $25,000 on average in town. And in addition, we have 57% of the residents of Greenfield, of the households in Greenfield, would be eligible for some level of subsidy if we had subsidies and if we had housing that would be available as affordable housing. So the reason that I am here is to find out if there is some way that we can work with the planning board to start looking at this issue and to start working together to bring about change. We have some ideas. There are some things we've talked to the council. We were at the zoning board the other night. What we're trying to do is talk with everybody who has a connection to this issue to see if there are ways that we can work together to bring about more affordable housing in Greenfield. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, we're going to be jumping into sort of some discussion in the next while about potential initiatives that the planning board could be taking relative to the zoning ordinance that could look at issues like housing and other issues in the town. So I think that's something that's definitely on our radar, and something we like to try and understand, and we appreciate your perspective on that and your group's perspective. Does anybody have any thoughts about how we might want to think about incorporating something like that? Susan's offering. Would this be a presentation you'd be making to us sort of formally?
We could also, if there are particular initiatives that you're interested in looking at, or for instance, where we know that there's going to be a downtown planning process that's going to be taking place starting in the spring. There are a couple of possible projects that are coming down the pike that we would, like, we're also looking at things like ADUs and trying to encourage ADUs as best we can where it is appropriate. So there's a lot of different directions that we can go in. But we'd really be interested in figuring out if there's some way that we can work with you to, either on the information that we have or on various questions that you might have about specific projects or specific developments that might be coming down the pike.
Okay, well, thanks. George?
Yeah, I just want to mention I had belatedly, as I hope the board had seen, sent out some materials from the master plan. It somewhat overlaps the FERCog materials and what Mark had previously summarized for the board, but it does from the housing chapter. It has several more generalized recommendations about increasing density, and I know we had talked about the idea of looking at the overall zoning. Lot size is referenced in the FERCog as well. So there are a number of things related to that that are kind of on the agenda for our discussion.
Right.
And I appreciate this group being so active. I attended all of those workshops, and I've been not active since then, but getting the thread about it. It's very impressive, the amount of activity that's going on. I think it is a great resource to tap into and dovetail the efforts with.
Yeah, so let's sort of keep that in the forefront of our thoughts as we're figuring out how the planning board can sort of help out in these initiatives through zoning initiatives. Basically, would be our role in this. I know there are other sort of issues that have to do with creating housing that outside of zoning, but in terms of how zoning affects that, where and how affordable housing can be built, I think we can potentially have a voice in that. So we did get a couple of some recommendations here from the Franklin County Regional Governments, Franklin County Regional Council of Governments. Eric, could you give us a little bit of background on these recommendations, sort of how they came to us, and sort of the context in which we should be thinking about these?
Sure, I'd love to do that. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So every year the Council of Governments offers local technical assistance to all its member communities. And Greenfield's obviously a member community of the COG. And every year we take advantage of that local technical assistance, which equates to about $5,000 worth of technical assistance. Last year we highlighted several zoning initiatives to include amending possibly our open space cluster ordinance, something to do with protection of agricultural land and other natural resources. And also we talked about infill development and adaptive reuse. So they didn't work on one specific one last year. They did a technical memo, which is what you have in front of you. It summarized the issues around 3 different topics that they honed in on. And one is exactly as I stated, the open space cluster development ordinance. And one is to do a agricultural protection overlay district. And then of course the infill redevelopment adaptive reuse. So if you read the technical manual, you will learn that we're doing pretty good when it comes to infill development and adaptive reuse. 3 things we already do. We allow mixed use development in many districts. We allow accessory dwelling units for infill. We recently reduced standards for the RA zone all of that promotes infill development and adaptive reuse. So I met with the mayor yesterday. We talked about this technical memo and the three options and what would be good, in her opinion, to work on for this year's local technical assistance. And we agreed that it would be the open space cluster development ordinance, because we're doing pretty good in the adaptive reuse infill development. In the agricultural overlay district, she had some reservations about that. Of course, the board makes its own decision, but so the mayor supports working on the cluster open space ordinance, and so do I. So what are the board's thoughts on those three separate initiatives?
So just to sort of clarify, Eric, so if we settled on one of these sort of three ideas, the FERCog would actually go through the process of meeting with us and helping us sort of craft the language for the ordinance that would be put forward.
Yeah, a good way to word it, except probably the other way around. You'd be helping them. They would be doing the heavy lifting, all the research, everything. So they'd come to you, of course, but they would be doing all the heavy lifting and you would refine it to your desire.
Heavy lifting, and but so that what does that mean? Does that mean crafting the language, or is that giving us sort of like the big picture concepts?
They would craft the actual language, and then
Right.
it'd be tweaked by the board.
Right. I guess that's what I meant. So they would come, they would potentially come meet with us. We'd have a discussion. They would come forward with a draft ordinance, which then we would sort of iterate it and comment on, and maybe there's a little bit of a back and forth, and then there's an ordinance that could be put forward as an initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
They wouldn't be able to do all three, so that's why we're choosing one, because
Right.
the local technical assistance can only go so far.
Right. Well, I guess my thought on this is that it's something that's been sort of thought about by the regional council of governments. So it has sort of it has kind of acceptance and buy-in by outside groups, and also the mayor. The mayor supports it, and so there's some groundwork already done on something like this, which makes it. And plus FERCog would write the ordinance, and so there's some incentives for us to consider something like this, I would think. Does anybody else have any?
Another statement to make, just popped in my mind out that we were talking about housing and affordable housing. So another reason we wanted to pick this one is because this was done in the 1980s with an update to make it by right instead of by special permit. It was so out of date. This is a very old ordinance. It needs to be modernized, but incentives could be built into this cluster. We won't call it cluster anymore. We'll call it open space residential development to provide affordable housing. Maybe you can decrease lot sizes even more and get more housing in affordable housing. So those are options with doing this work. You can deal with housing and land development.
Mm-hmm.
Charles, can I just ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure, Mark.
So, Eric, can you just tease that out a little? So in terms of when you're talking about incentives, what you're saying is that allowances could be made if there was commitments to X number of units being affordable. Could you just help me wrap my head around what incentives specifically for affordable housing would look like as opposed to just generating housing?
Yeah, if
And
you
is
do,
that what we're talking about, kind of changing some of our latitude around that in exchange for some commitments?
yeah, if they provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, then they could get additional lots, or there's different ways of doing it. That's one way you can get additional lots above and beyond the standard. And that's what I'm hoping they'll research, tell us what other incentives exist. I've seen a few examples, but would want to get all their research in. But that's the intent. A certain percentage would be affordable. Incentive would be prescribed like a inclusionary zoning ordinance, but it would be incentive based.
Got it. Thank you, Eric.
So I guess one question also, I'm just wondering, like, what kind of land resources are we talking about that something like this would target? If I'm just thinking about, the neighborhoods in Greenfield, and you're thinking about, an open space cluster development. So what sorts of properties, what neighborhoods in Greenfield would something like this potentially target?
This, if we do the standard typical modern open space residential development ordinance, it's going to require a huge set aside of open space. And there'll be certain requirements for this open space. Does it touch other open space? Does it have environmental value to it? All that gets preserved by allowing smaller lot sizes, smaller road construction, smaller road frontage, so that it's tighter knit, with outlying areas being preserved and maybe even designed so that the residents of the subdivision can enjoy all these amenities in addition to the regular public. So it would apply to the entire city of Greenfield. We could make it, right now it's 5 acres or more to do a cluster open space development. Maybe that could be reduced so that some of the tighter knit neighborhoods could maybe squeeze in a subdivision here and there. But what we're talking about here is future. Right now, there's no development pressure on our farmland and our outlying areas. But let's say that the sea rises 3 feet and the east and west coast need to move into the interior. Given that,
Right.
there's going to be pressure on all of our agricultural land. So having this in place to preserve particular types of land is really going to be necessary for the future.
Do you think there's any potential overlap between strategies to preserve and protect agricultural land and the open space development concept?
Yes, I think we could merge the two and kind of do them all both in one. It'd be kind of unique, but it could be done.
I think because when I think about like where Greenfield's open land is generally farmland at this point.
Yes.
And so if we're creating sort of incentives, density incentives and things like that for developing, in areas that are potentially farmland, it seems like we'd want to have a lot of protections in place for that.
When I mentioned typical 70% set aside of open space, that open space usually is of some environmental value or connects to other open space or provides opportunities for recreation. But also we could say if it's agricultural land, it needs to be part of the 70% set aside being preserved. We could do that. It definitely could work.
George?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines, Charles. I appreciate you asking that because I was struck in the memo as far as the open space about the 25% that we currently require as compared to some other communities around here. So that was quite striking, that's a way to preserve space on a case-by-case basis. And also just, going through the master plan again, the how precious the agricultural land is. And so I like the idea of, dovetailing these two together. Because boy, once that's gone, it's gone. So,
Right.
Trying to follow the direction of the master plan to really take that need for preservation seriously and come up with some strategies to work toward that.
What, Natty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, the conversation here is sort of open space, what is currently open that we'd want to have preserved or, maintain its agricultural use. I guess if we're trying to dovetail with cluster development, my mind immediately goes to, okay, what about more residential districts that have, or zones that have the opportunity for cluster development, but don't have open space at this point, other than, perhaps mowed lawns and, the occasional tree. I would want to, at some point, and my mind goes immediately to carbon sequestration, like there is a value to pasture land, right? It's not agriculture, but it is sequestering carbon in the top few, inches of soil. If that kind of thinking is taken into account, then residential or I should say heavily residential infill cluster development could be a possibility if the rest of that property is used appropriately and could meet the standards that that we set. So what in the end there, I don't want to leave us only thinking about what about all the farmland and the forest that's going to be there and try and preserve it. If we're trying to dovetail these things, we need to consider cluster development in areas where it could be a remodel or a redevelopment of existing property that already has residential use.
Yeah, that's a really good thought. I mean, the idea of like opening up our open space, our farmland for development is, I'm not sure personally how I feel about that concept. And I like the idea of developing and densifying kind of within the areas of town that already are developed, and what are the options or opportunities for that. And what I would be curious to see what, and I should know this, but for instance, how many square feet how many square feet is required per unit, in the development of a lot downtown, in Greenfield, as opposed to some other towns. Maybe it's even in this document that the FERCog sent us, but kind of seems like densifying in town, to me, is something I'm interested in. George?
Yeah, and that's really highlighted in the some of the things I sent, the document I sent earlier today. I had referenced it at our December meeting. But from the housing chapter of the master plan about increasing housing density within a mile of downtown, and also in certain mixed use neighborhoods, neighborhood nodes as it refers to.
Right.
And that seems to link up. And I know, Eric, you're saying we can't do everything, but I'm looking at the second paragraph in the FERCog memo of number 2, which is talking about, seems like the process we were thinking about of re-envisioning the urban residential zone, and as far as lot size, and so that seems to fit in with what you're referencing, Charles. And I know that's something we had put on hold, and we were talking about whether you'd need an expensive consultation. I know at some point, Eric, you had said we could kind of do that in-house, but that sounded pretty ambitious to me. So,
Well,
but it seems worthwhile as well. So, it's hard to.
yeah. Mark, I know you had your hand up. I just had one more comment about that. I mean, would FERCog consider doing a mapping analysis of the RA zone and thinking about breaking that down into subzones that might have different zoning requirements?
For this local technical assistance, they're only going to do one, so the board needs to make a decision. But
Right.
they can always do fee for service work, so we could pay them to do what you just said. It wouldn't be under local technical assistance.
But if we suppose we decided, oh, the one we want to pick is looking at creating density within the RA zone. That's what we want to do. Would they then sort of look into, would they be able to do the mapping for that, or would they just write the ordinance?
No, they have a good GIS department. They could easily do the mapping.
Mark?
Well, I guess just kind of a clarifying question here, because I've initially, the way this was framed, I thought we were really trying to choose a trajectory out of these 3 options. But if we're talking about option 1, open space and cluster development ordinance, we then have to kind of hone in on technical assistance around A, B, or C in 1? Because I was initially taking it of like, oh, there's so much that we could work with within this first option. There's a lot of different things they're saying they could do. But now I'm starting to think that what we're actually saying is, no, we can work around open space and rural residential. Or we can talk about density bonuses to maximize protected space, but not both and?
No, they would all be part of the same ordinance.
Okay.
Right. I
Okay.
think in number one, A, B, and C are the different things that we could consider under the open space cluster development plan. I mean, in the opportunities
lot.
in number two, they just sort of they don't really they sort of they don't break it down into like A, B's, and C's. They sort of talk about a number of different things we could consider, and one of them is something that was brought up by councilors Dolan and Wheeler a couple years ago when they were talking about looking at the density in the residential zones, and at the time we we said, well, yeah, I think there is interest in that, and we could look at that, and we've been sort of waiting for the momentum for that to kick in, and maybe this is something that could jumpstart that, which is that particular issue. And I think getting it, understanding how to positively, densify the downtown is and with incentives for affordable housing seems like a really could possibly be a good combination.
It's pretty resonant to me. Hey, Charles, before I cede the floor, can I also just take a second to acknowledge that I'm an employee of the FERCog? But it feels to me that within this, that what we're talking about here is not so much whether or not to give work to the FERCog, but more just kind of what are some of the strategic directions that the city of Greenfield wants to take. So I do feel comfortable voting on this, but would defer to the judgment of the group if people felt like there was any kind of a conflict. But it doesn't feel to me like there is a conflict within this.
It doesn't seem like it would be unless we were hiring FERCog to do something.
Exactly. I think if this was about actually kind of giving them money from the city budget or whatnot, that would be one thing. But this is really just about the city will deploy them one way or the other. And so this is just about how we wish to deploy them. But it felt a little, I just wanted to acknowledge I work there.
Yeah, thanks. Does that seem right, Eric?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. You could easily vote.
Okay, cool. Thanks, folks.
Yeah. George?
Thanks. But just to be clear, Eric, you were raising the possibility of, in addition to the technical assistance that's part of the standing agreement, that we could seek fee for service from FERCog or we could try to get that if we want to do more than just the one thing.
Yes, any member community of the COG can request a fee for, services and pay them to do whatever they're capable of doing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Let me make another statement about the technical memo and which way to go. In my mind, the urban core, we've already done a great job in the urban core. We allow accessory dwelling units by right attached or within. The only one that requires a special permit is detached. We now allow 1, 2, and 3 family units by right in all the residential districts. I guarantee you can't find another town in Western Mass that allows that. So that right there is very progressive, plus the infill development. I'm leaning toward the open space cluster development ordinance with the mayor, and you can get some incentives in there for affordable housing when development pressure does come to the city.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking, and I don't know if I'm understanding this right, but it seems like we're incentivizing development of our open space with an ordinance like this.
No, we're not. We're protecting open space because once development pressure comes to a community, if land is available and there's pressure and somebody offers a farmer this much money so he doesn't have to do succession, he's going to take it and develop it into residential lots, all of this land. So this type of ordinance is going to protect 70% of that space when they do the subdivision.
So can the ordinance be written in such a way that if you're in if you're in a certain zone, agricultural zone, or you have a farmland property, that that this is the only development option for that piece of property?
Yes, we could make the cluster ordinance, I mean, we won't call it cluster, open space residential development option the only option. And we could say that a standard subdivision requires a special permit, or not allowed even, we could do that.
What about A&Rs? Can we say certain zones are not, or you can't do A&Rs in, or is that just?
A&Rs are allowed through the Commonwealth and any road throughout until the Land Use Reform Act gets done. No one can stop A&Rs.
Right. Which is kind of like the blunt instrument of land development. George?
Yeah, just to clarify, because Charles's earlier question, Eric, was about with regard to the open space development, also incorporating something about protection of agricultural land, and I didn't quite understand if that meant potentially having an agricultural protection overlay district or not, because you were saying the mayor was disinclined to pursue that. I wasn't sure the rationale for that. So I just wanted to understand if those two things are compatible with each other, or.
Yes, they are compatible. And, you know, we talked about climate change, and I think that's one of the reasons the mayor wants to have some land available for when if that happens, or when it happens in the future. But she really understands, by being on the planning board, that the cluster development ordinance hasn't really been used. It's so old, dated. So she felt strongly on that one. But you can do, so what they have in this technical memo, A, B, and C under one. But D could be agricultural protection, agricultural land protection. And I could see it being that if some prime farmland or farmland of statewide significance is on a piece of parcel that someone proposes a subdivision, that they have to work around that and preserve as much as they can and still do the cluster development. So I think both could be combined. You could do incentives for affordable housing, protection of open space to include agricultural land. I don't think it would bring in development and make people come to Greenfield, because we have this 70% set aside. Is no one's going to do that unless there's development pressure where you have to build, and to do that you got to set aside 70%.
Thank you. Yes, I see at the at the end of the first sentence of section 1B, it mentions agricultural land. You can have certain incentives. So great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And and we could be looking at things like, it doesn't have to be single family housing that we're talking about here. There's ways to do multifamily residential development, which has a lower carbon footprint, is even denser, and as other possible development alternatives. Yeah, Eric.
The existing cluster open space development ordinance allows multifamily, so they would probably want to include that and keep that in there, which is a great option. And I wanted to address Natty's comment as well. Right now, the minimum acreage to do that, and it's typical, is 5 acres. Some of it requires 10 acres in a lot of communities. Northampton, they brought it down to under 5, I think. But it's difficult to get those done, open space residential developments on land under a certain acreage. So the urban core area wouldn't find too many opportunities for that, but we could have them look into that and try to include that in this overall ordinance.
Susan, I see your hand up.
I know I'm not. I don't know if I'm allowed to speak or not.
Well, I think because we're not not under a huge time pressure here. We do want to finish up here in another maybe 15 minutes, and there's not you're not one of like a horde of people wanting to speak. So
I just wanted to say that if within that, as you look at affordable housing, if you could look at it that housing would be 100% or less of AMI, that would ensure that it is affordable housing, and we're not seeing something where there is housing, where there's a mega mansion that comes in and that's how they take care. So the 30% is for the mega mansion and the rest of it is open space. So if
right, no, I think that there's got to be some definition of what kind of development is allowed under open space development, and it's not going to be single family house. It's not going to be one single family house.
Right.
I mean, at least in my opinion.
That wouldn't be a subdivision, it'd be a single lot development, so it wouldn't apply.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yep. What was I going to say? Slipped my mind. Sorry. So we could have, maybe it makes sense for, we don't really have to vote on what we want the FERCog to do tonight, but we could vote on whether or not we would like to invite them in to discuss conceptually some of the things we've been talking about with the open space development cluster, density, and agricultural preservation of agriculture. I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap in all of these three things that we could define into a reasonable scope that they might be willing to take on. Eric?
And unfortunately, you have to vote tonight because I gotta get them the answer tomorrow.
Oh, so okay.
But would we just choose like option 1, 2, or 3, and then we would need to flesh out what that means and what our priorities are within that? Or we really need to like hash out our exact priorities and needs and ask of them tonight? I mean, Eric, if we just say we want to work with number 1, is that enough for tomorrow?
That's a good enough for now. That's all you got to do. And then they'll work with you to get everything in there that you want.
And then we can talk more with Kimberly about like the city's actual priorities within this from there.
Exactly. Precisely.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. So yeah, we vote for option 1, and then in the process of writing an initiative, we can pick and choose some ideas from other. Yeah, we can craft it.
Yeah, I think the first step, if you choose to do local technical assistance number 1, they would probably meet with you first and talk about everything we did tonight about what the strategies would be, what we're thinking about.
All right.
Then they would go back and try to draft up an ordinance.
Okay, I mean, something like this could, and this will take some time to go through the process. So, which is which is good. I mean, but we want to make sure that putting an ordinance through is time intensive for the community, public hearings, joint hearings between the planning board and the EDC, discussion, going before the town council, city council. So it's a real commitment to a direction, and so we want. So it takes a lot of effort. We want to make sure that what we're putting forward is something we really believe in, and we feel has community buy-in, community consensus. So if we think we can craft something like that around the open space development cluster, I think it's something to consider. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Emily, do you have any opinions or thoughts on what we've been talking about here?
I was just my brain, what I said in there is that you put it concisely, like really well. I'm really interested to hear it a bit more fleshed out on A, B, and C. So I think having them work with us is going to be really, really good. That's one of my big reasons for being here is additional housing.
Okay, thanks. Mark, are you raising your hand, or are you just twiddling your pencil?
No, I'm just thoughtfully clicking my pen. But since I'm already occupying the space and speaking, let me just throw in that it does seem to me that as we continue to have kind of this ongoing discussion of what are our priorities and the initiatives that we want to be supporting, as we're talking about looking at the open space plan, the master plan, the hazard mitigation, I mean, like, it just feels to me like we're going to be having the discussion around even within open space and cluster development. I think as we continue to have that discussion this evening, over the next couple of meetings, that's just going to get more fleshed out around how could we use this opportunity for the FERCog working on this to realize some of those priorities.
Yeah.
It feels very timely to me, and it feels like the obvious choice.
That's a great thought, Mark. Thanks for that.
Charles, I also feel like, I don't know, but like out of the three that they presented with us, that number one definitely addresses most directly and most completely our issues that
Right,
that we want to address.
I think we can get a lot in here, maybe. And I think learning more from FERCog will only sort of, I think, illuminate the opportunities.
I make a motion to request option 1, open space and cluster development ordinance, as to be provided as technical assistance by the FERCog.
I'll second.
Okay. Any more discussion on that? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstentions? Nays? All right, so it's a unanimous vote, so I won't do a roll call tonight, but that's great, thank you. Has the applicant for the ADU arrived?
He has not called me back and has not arrived.
Is
which
it possible?
surprises me.
Is it possible for us to hold the public hearing on this without him, or should we just continue it till next meeting when he can be here?
You legitimately have both options. This is a pretty straightforward application, so you could do it either way.
George?
I would just suggest we find out if there was anyone who wanted to comment on that tonight, since it had been posted and notice had gone out to abutters, I assume, Eric, right? So
Yes.
I just wanted to, if there were anyone here who wanted to comment, I didn't know if we can take comment tonight and then could repeat it, Eric, at the next meeting. Is that possible?
Usually a comment period comes in kind of after an applicant presents a project.
Yes.
And given that the applicant's not here to present, I don't, and there's no possibility for a dialogue for us as a board to deliberate and think about what we're hearing from the public and what the applicant has put forward and what our own thoughts are. So I guess I would tend to think that we should.
Typically what's done is the board continues it to the next meeting.
Yeah, that would be my inclination, I think.
Would you like me to make a motion to continue it to the next meeting until if the applicant is able to join us?
Sure, if that's a motion.
So made.
So made.
Second.
Further
Mr.
discussion
Chairman,
on that?
it has
Eric?
to be a date and time specific. And when was the board going to meet next? Will you meet February 3rd? With this on the agenda, there's something on the agenda now. There was nothing on the agenda before. So February 3rd at 6 p.m. would be the motion.
What day of the week is the 3rd? Oh, Thursday, of course.
Thursday. Oh.
I had something happening, but it's the following week. So yeah, the third works for me. Does it work for other folks?
So motion to continue tonight's application for 128 Conway Street until the 3rd of February at 6 p.m.
Second.
Right. All right. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that's unanimous. All right, thank you. We'll reconvene on the 3rd, and another shot at this. Hopefully, the applicant will be able to make it. George?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. The point I was making was if someone who had been notified had come to this as it was scheduled and say perhaps wouldn't be available at that time, I just wanted to honor the intent of the special permit process of hearing from interested members of the public. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Yeah. Okay. Any other business this evening? Any board and staff reports? I don't have anything to report myself.
Charles, I actually did have one thing, and Susan's presence is reminding me of this. The Community Preservation Committee, some of our terms are actually ending June of 2022 would be the final month of my term. The thinking of the committee is that it makes sense for the 3 of us whose terms would be ending on this 1-year cycle, because we're so new, some continuity would be helpful. And I'm willing to continue on in that capacity. But the hope was that we could kind of discuss that and move that either, the reappointment of me or the appointment of somebody else, so that there was indeed somebody positioned to hold that seat representing the planning board running July 1st. So we don't need to kind of take the vote on it tonight. We've still got several months, but I do want to just get out on people's radar that if anybody else was dying to be on the CPC, you should be thinking about it and making that case now. But I'm more than happy to continue on for one more term if that works for the rest of the members of the board. So.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we got some time to think about it. If somebody else has, as you say, the burning interest to compete for your seat, then we can take that up at the time.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about that. I don't want to edge out anybody else who's coming on and wants to be learning and contributing, but I do think it is a valid point of, it's just a newer body. We've all been kind of learning, building it as we fly already. But whatever works for the group is fun.
Okay, great. Thanks. George?
Technical question. When there is a representative of the planning board on some committee, like CPA or the master plan committee, is that determined by a vote of the board, or is it by assignment of the chair?
I don't remember how we did this before.
I don't.
I think.
How did I even get on this committee?
I think we voted. I think, you know what, Mark? I think you just volunteered.
He did, but we agreed to it.
But what did Charles then just say? Fine, I appoint you, or did the board vote as a collective?
No, it was an informal. Agreement that yes, you would be a good candidate. I don't.
It was all go for you. Good for you.
Well, if we need to have a campaign season with some speeches or whatnot, that's something we could be looking at in the later winter just to jack meetings up.
Maybe you could get some lawn signs up, Mark.
Perhaps we could debate.
Make some cupcakes.
Yeah. No, that's great. We really appreciate. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the board does too. Your involvement on that, Mark. George.
Yeah, but I didn't know if I don't think it's an issue of things being contentious, but it might be helpful to clarify that. For example, if there's an appointee of the city council, does the council vote on that, or does the president assign that person? And you would probably know that, Mark.
On a council level, it is a presidential appointment. It's not put to the whole board. It could be discussed or whatnot, but it would be the council president's purview to appoint somebody to those types of boards.
Yeah.
And my recollection. Oh, sorry, Charles.
No, I was just gonna say I think the planning board could establish their own rules around appointments to committees and boards, and it could either be we could do it by a vote, or we could do it by an appointment by the chair or even the vice chair, and I think it would be however we want to establish that rule.
Yeah. I was just going to say my recollection of my becoming the planning board representative on the master plan and committee implementation committee was that Roxanne had appointed me. That's my recollection, but I don't know if you have any recall of that. Eric, I don't. It probably was a discussion and a volunteering process, but I think technically Roxanne had appointed me. But
I think she did. I agree.
yeah, okay, thanks. But good campaign speech, Mark.
So maybe what we'll do is we'll put on the agenda at some point planning board rules for appointments to committees, and then we'll establish that, and then we'll at the same time we'll take up your case and decide what to do. Natty?
How about we just vote to have the chair appoint the person, and now we've filled both buckets.
Yeah, I don't know if we could vote on something tonight, but we could.
No, I'm saying when Mark's campaign signs go up and the speeches are had,
Right.
then we vote to have you just appoint whoever you deem appropriate.
Oh, right.
Unless, of course, there's contention, a contender.
Right.
Who has better cupcakes.
Right. Okay. George?
And I will just say that the Master Plan Implementation Committee had been a bit dormant in the fall, but it had missed a couple of months of meetings because of lack of a quorum, and we've lost a couple of members, which contributed to that. But we're going to be getting started up again next Thursday, and for the new year, and also there's going to be some continuation of the deliberate downtown process that had started almost 2 years ago. And that's going to be, some of that's going to be happening during the SGIC meetings. There's also going to be I think a first kickoff of that MJ Adams is coordinating on Monday, the 31st. So just wanted to, but it's going to be somewhat of a dovetailed process with the SGIC. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you. Any other business this evening? Dave, how was your first meeting, your first official meeting?
It was very interesting. I'm really impressed with the thoughtfulness that goes into these issues. And I congratulate everybody for that. They're difficult things to wrestle with as far as I can determine. And I compliment you all on doing a fantastic job of staying with it.
Well, thanks, Dave. We look forward to having you here and getting your thoughts and opinions on things as we move forward. George?
I just wanted to say I also value the input of the public and appreciate what Susan had to add and other people attending. And I appreciate, Charles, you giving an opportunity for that participation in your role as chair. So.
And in that spirit, I see a hand in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, but there's no name associated with. Oh, Pamela. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to meet some of you or all of you. And even though it may say no time for public comment, I recently made an inquiry because I attended the zoning board recently, and there was absolutely no chance to say anything. And I'm here representing Housing Greenfield and looking for affordable housing. I work with people at the town hall. I'm working with somebody, MJ, got me acquainted with Athena. So I'm here in support of trying to figure out what Greenfield can do. And I'm very concerned about the homeless people and the temperature. And I'm glad we finally have said they can go indoors 24/7 in the meantime. But I'm grateful for the chance to talk. So I will come again because I think it's important to hear from public. I make a public comment at every city council meeting and have ever since I moved back to the city I was born in. So I appreciate your time and the fact that you were open to listening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pamela. And one more comment, Dorothy?
Yes, I also want to thank you and for all your work tonight on these new developments in what we need for housing here in Greenfield. I just wanted to state that I also feel it's very important in terms of not just affordable housing, but making sure that we're also making more housing accessible for people. I know it's it's harder when it's excuse me, when it's further out of town, but to have more spaces that are available for people who have accessibility issues, and we don't have enough of that now. So that's important to include that. And also I agree that we also have to have more options besides shelters for the homeless, and there needs to be housing that's permanent, that's housing first, that they can get into and have a start to get their lives together, whatever's going on. And that might also need to be closer to town and need services as well. But I think there's opportunities for that to happen. So I guess that's all I have to say, but I thank you for all your work and appreciate being here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dorothy.
Charles, could I just throw out a quick question for the Housing Greenfield people?
Yes.
Just wondering, do you guys have any kind of written materials, educational materials, like that you could send to the chair to push out to us, or is this just more of a starting point where you're just kind of building? If you're doing this outreach, I just didn't know if you actually had some stuff that you wanted us to read. I'm big on like reading as a way of learning more, and so I just didn't know if you had some PDFs or information that you could send along.
Dorothy, I'm sorry, Susan.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of reading material right now, but what we do have is a website that has all kinds of stuff on it and has actually the forum that we ran. So you could pick and choose what's there. So the website is housingishumanright.com. No A in the human right. So housingishumanright.com. And if you go to the forum section, there is a listing of all the workshops that we had, and there are videos of all those workshops.
And no A in human, you said, Susan.
No A in housing. It normally would be housing is a human right.
Housing is human right.
Housing is human right.
It's like housing is human, right?
It's a funny place to use the A, but whatever. Gotcha.
George?
Thank you.
George? Yeah, I just want to mention, just from the point of view of housing options, and them being accessible and being in the urban core. Through my professional role with Clinical and Sport Options, I've become aware of there's some new housing that is just opening up. Elizabeth House on the beginning of Congress Street, I think it is. And I know some people who are moving in there very soon. So there are some, concrete, efforts being made to provide some housing. So a little bit of encouraging news in that regard.
And I'd also like to, I know you want to adjourn, I'm sorry. I just want to point out that we're a group of very concerned citizens, but we have a lot of agencies that are hooked into this particular group that we represent. And Susan could list them off for you. There's a bunch of them. They're dedicated. Opioid Task Force is one of them. That's out in North Quabbin area, but it's also right here. So want to list the others, Susan, just so people know?
The Regional Housing Authority is involved. We have, we have a really good, I think, broad spectrum of people who have been working in housing or are interested in housing. I just want to say that Judy, who is here, also is working on the development of a community housing trust. So we're also looking at that possibility for Franklin County. I don't know if Judy, you want to chime in a little bit before I'll give you the floor.
Yeah. So as part of the housing forum, I did the workshop on community land trusts, where we had a woman from the Champlain Housing Trust up in Vermont come and talk about what they did in the city of Burlington and surrounding, and also the woman that's the executive director of the Wyndham Windsor County Housing Trust and stuff. So we're looking at the possibility of starting a new Franklin County Community Land Trust, which would really fit in really well with what you were talking about today with the open space cluster housing. I mean, that would be like the ideal kind of setup for building houses on a community land trust kind of basis. So that's my interest, and also I thank you for for welcoming us to this meeting.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. I think that are we reaching the end of the evening here? Do I have a motion to, first of all, thank you all once again. Great meeting. It's been a while. Looking forward to our next one. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
Motion to. Sorry, George.
So moved.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Night,
All right.
everybody.